Happy New Year.
Thank you, same to you all.
2007. So, David's the official photographer. Hi. Merry
Hi.
Christmas.
Thank
Happy
you.
New Year. Camera on. I'm Grandpa. So,
Yeah. Well, since it's Christmas, I gotta tell you.
morning, Amy.
I gotta tell you about.
Oh my God, don't do that.
Did you just wake up?
Yeah, I just woke up. You
Oh,
woke
the
me
Queen
up.
had a busy night last night. Ice skating.
For free.
So, Grandpa,
Well,
we got the camera out so we can get you on tape. And we had some questions for you.
oh, okay.
So, we're going to just kind of take it back a little bit. And we want to know where you were born.
Crosby, Ironton, 1924.
Crosby,
Crosby, Ironton. There were
Ironton.
2 towns on the Iron Range. And my father at that point was the superintendent of the County of the Iron Range until 1929, when the big crash happened on Wall Street. And after that,
Great Depression.
we had no such thing as a yellow parachute. You know what I mean by that?
Savings.
There just was no, like you have all kinds of compensations and so forth. These days, at least some protection, but in those days, there was none. And when you were fired and they closed the plant, you were out of money.
So what did your dad end up doing after that?
We did a lot of things. We were peripatetic. By that I mean we moved around wherever there would work. And one thing that saved us was that Franklin Roosevelt started this alphabets program with WPA and NRA and so forth.
The New Deal.
And that was the Works Progress Administration. And my father was able to work occasionally on building roads around Aiken and between Aiken and Duluth. Well, we were out in California for a couple of years, living out there. While my father was still back here, my mother, June, and I were in California, living with Grandma. And that was about 2 years while we were there. And I can remember we lived in Old Town, which was all Hispanic. And these kids were not students; they were big kids. And so when my mother was shopping, I hung pretty close to her. I was about 10 years old, and they were looking at me like I was fresh meat.
You're scared of him?
Oh yeah. So, well, at school, there was myself and one other person who were different. There was Jimmy, who was a black kid, and myself. And the teacher used to put us out of the corner right by the door. See, and when we went out for recess, Jimmy and I never got a chance to bat or anything like that. We were always out in the field retrieving the ball, see. But at nighttime, when we were at home, and the bell rang, Jimmy and I'd go out that door and run like hell, all the way across towards Tuckalooly Valley, and there'd be a whole gang of these kids chasing us, throwing sticks and stones at us. That was an experience.
So you grew up in the Iron Range.
Yeah, but we
But
moved.
when did you? How did you end up like in Two Harbors?
Oh, that was the last stop. I had been in 12 different schools before I got into the 6th grade. In the 6th grade in 1936. And at that time, my father then was fortunate enough to be in the Forestry Service.
In the Forestry Service?
Forestry Service. Building bridges and roads and stuff like that.
Okay.
Fighting
CCC.
fires up in the and that's how the CCs got going. See,
What are the CCs?
that's the Conservation Corps.
Oh,
And there are, even today, you will find remnants of that in the backwoods and on Sawmill Trail and up by Walnut and where they built these camps, Quonset hut camps. And young men came from all over the state.
so did you move to Two Harbors from California?
No, we moved to Norway. When we came back, we came back from there. The first place we lived was Lutzen,
Lutzen.
up the North Shore.
Yeah.
Lutzen and Tofty area. That's where I got to know a lot of Scandinavian kids. in school, and I enjoyed those years. But we finally moved down to Harvard because my father got a job in a camp closer to Duluth, or closer to Harvard, see. And so,
Now, you graduated from two Harbors High School, right?
yeah, 1942.
And you played football?
Yep, for 5 years.
Is that what you got your crooked nose? Playing
Yeah.
football?
I'd heard that from my ancestors. No, I got beat up a little bit, but that was my passion, just like hockey is his.
So your dad ended up working for the Forestry Service,
Yeah.
and you guys ended up in two harbors.
Yep,
And you graduated from two Harbors High School
1942.
in '42.
By that time, Herman, my eldest sister's husband, Terry and Tim and his father,
Uh-huh.
he had been courting Yana for a long time, and they finally got married, and I forget what year.
Herman married Lee,
Leona.
Leona.
Yeah, and they had 3 boys. Anyway, I lived with them because my parents moved a little bit again to another place, and I didn't want to go because I had all my friends and everything in school there. So I lived with Herman and Leona for a year.
Oh, okay.
And I was just so I could graduate from high school. I can remember Herman helped me with my bookkeeping. I had bookkeeping in one of the classes, and I was a little bit behind. I wasn't going to graduate unless that got done, so Herman would sit up all night long.
Did you go to war after that, Grandpa?
Like that?
Did you go to the war after that?
No, that was 1940, 43. Yeah, well, it was a year later. Because when I got out of high school and graduated, I went to Kansas City because I wanted to be involved in aircraft, and I wanted to go. In fact, I wanted to go when 1941, when Pearl Harbor happened. I called my mother and said, I'm going to go to Waco, Texas and be a pilot. And she said, no, I don't think so.
What did she want you to do instead?
Well, I had 1 year of school left to go. See?
She wanted you to finish.
She wouldn't let me go. That broke my heart. But then when I got out of school and got into Kansas City, I went to aviation school there and learned about engines and whatnot. And then next thing I was an instructor in the John Bill Jr. School of Aviation in Kansas City. And from there, I went into the Navy, and I got a rating right away because I had some, experience behind me. So I was about 3 years in the Navy as a flight engineer.
What does a flight engineer do?
Well, a flight engineer, up until World War II, there was no experience in Army or Navy or any Air Force for long-distance bombing. And now they had to provide for that, see? And that meant that as an engineer, we learned all about loading the plane, we learned about weather, we learned about our cruise controls, how much gas it would take to get there and get back. They used to fly on what you call automatic rich all the time, which was very consuming a lot of gas. So now we would take off in automatic rich with our loads and get up in the air. And when we got up to speed, we'd cut it back our mixture to a lot less. And you could fly hundreds and hundreds of miles on the tank. No. But we attempted to analyze how much gas we would need so we could get back.
Yeah.
That's what engineers are doing. And I would sit right between the pilot and co-pilot. And that's my job was to look and keep my eyes open for fighter planes and stuff that were coming in from the other side. Anyway, we had in And we went all over the country in different schools, gunnery schools and mechanical schools and whatnot. And we had a guy by the name of Curly, who was just as bald-headed as I am. And Curly he was in his late 20s, which was pretty old for a guy at that time to be in the service. And he was also training to be a flight engineer like I was in Florida and elsewhere. And Curly had no hair, but he was a commercial pilot. He had a commercial pilot license before he ever got into the service, but he could not fly because he was too old. He must have been in his 30s, I think, something like that.
Okay.
So he was met like me. Anyway, we were training in lots of ensigns and lieutenant JJs and lieutenants who were going to be pilots. And I had a captain commander who he wore his hat anyway, he felt like it. His necktie was loose, and he was a real go-to-hell guy. See it? So I'd be out there in the morning checking out the planes, checking the props, pulling the props through to see if there's no oil in the bottom cylinders, you know, and checking the whole ship out before we went up. And there would be a couple of ensigns or training officers that we were training, and they'd be following around. Commander Vincent would come out here and he'd say, "Okay, Mac, get your ass inside. If Cameron says we're going up, we're going up." And he was a great guy, a very great guy. But anyway, they were bounce hopping. You know, by that I mean they were learning to land and take off, land and take off. So they'd take off, circle the field for a while, and learn to land again. They'd be 24s. And Minton got a little disgusted with one guy because Curly was on my crew, and he said, "I got a guy back there that's a mechanic for you. I'm taking some plug this thing better than you can. Curly, come on up here." But
Michael, David.
Curly went up and took his place in the pilot's seat, and he took that plane off like nobody's business and landed it so beautifully. And he just put this poor old ensign to shame, because Curly was nothing more than a mechanic, see? But he was a commercial air pilot.
Ah.
And so, also, when we had Liberty by Curly, and I would go and rent a plane and we'd go flying around, see? And there'd be my smaller plane, and one time we were coming in Wichita, Kansas, somewhere, and here's a telephone line going across the field on our entry, and I thought, sure as hell, he was going to go over that, but he didn't even under it.
Oh my goodness.
Under that.
That's scary.
That was scary, yes.
Because how do you know if the tail's going to clear?
Yeah, but he took chances like that, and he was a good pilot. I learned a lot from Curly. But anyway,
So after the war, you ended up back in Two Harbors?
yes.
So you went right back. Did you stay with your mom and dad after the war? Or?
No, but they were in Minneapolis
Michael
now,
was
see.
born.
My dad and my mother were in Minneapolis, retired, and
Uh-huh.
my dad had a heart attack at one point, and that's what brought them down there. So that's where they were. I got out of service. My dad came to meet me, and we went and bought some civilian clothes together, and so forth. But I went back up to Two Harbors, and started working for Vern Anderson and in his gas station. And Vern and I were going to build a new station together, but he had some money and I didn't. So the bank wouldn't loan me any. I had no assets or anything like that. So I went on working for him for a while. Then O&M came down one day and wanted me to take their station over. And I says, "I haven't got any money." I had $500, that's all I had to start in there. And they said, "That's okay, we'll back you, we'll give you all the credits you need." So I was on credit for 36 years, trying to get caught up. and anyway, they want to get out of the gas business and go into the wholesale business.
Oh,
Anyway, see.
okay.
And they wanted so badly that they were going to give me any deal that was practical. So, anyway,
So that's how you picked up the Phillips 66?
yeah, there for 36 years,
So
all in debt all the time. And
when did you get married the first time?
first time was about 19, just after high school, 1942, 43. How old was Michael?
He got married in 1942 in December.
Yeah.
How old is Michael?
She was born in 1943.
Michael's 16. Oh, Michael, your daughter?
Yeah,
She was born in 1943.
She was born in 43.
well, 43. Well, that's-
So she
yeah,
is 63 years old.
something like that. She's 20 years older than me, or younger than me. I mean, yeah. But anyhow, that marriage didn't work out very well. But during that time, I did a lot of business, and we were really rolling. But in those days, there were no credit cards, and there was a lot of credit business. That was just the norm. Grocery stores, every place.
You'll put it on my tab and I'll pay you later?
Yeah, pay on payday. Trouble is, when payday came around, they never paid you in full. They paid you parts. And so you always had, I had somewhere around $30,000 on the books. And at that time also they were building Silver Bay. That's the iron ore company, see?
Yeah.
Iron ore company up in Silver Bay. And I had a lot of customers. We were open practically all night long. Because at payday, these guys would come down to the Vets Club and leave their cars with me for repairs and so forth. And they'd go and drink and have a good time and dance, and then they'd come and get their cars. Started out that most of them paid cash, and that was fine. Then those who were paying cash quite a while needed credit, so I started giving them credit.
So everybody owed you.
Yeah, $30,000.
Everybody owed you. Hey, so
And,
let me take you back a little bit though. Tell me a little bit about your dad. You know, what was he a big guy or?
no. Dad was a small, feisty, hot-tempered Scots-Irish,
Okay.
and mother was calm and sedate and very quiet. You know.
Now I had a chance to meet your mom when she was living in San Diego at the end of her life.
That's right, you did.
There's a picture of you and your mom and Becky and Amy, the 4 generations.
Yes.
But I never had a chance to meet your dad.
No, I think he was dead by that time.
Well, he died in 19. He died before Becky was born.
So
He
wait,
died in 1961.
died in 61.
Yeah.
Why?
Okay. What did your dad die of?
Well, he had lung problems. And we went into, that's strange, because he and mother by that time were living in California, taking care of my mother's mother.
Why'd you come with me?
And my dad was the caretaker, because he was the guy that dressed her and made, did everything, because she was a raunchy old gal that my mother couldn't get along with.
That's your grandma,
And my grandma.
your mom's mom.
Mom's mom. She was
What
so,
was her name?
She was so, I can't even remember, for God's sake, what her name was.
I can see what's.
She was, her first husband was my grandfather. She was a Gould, but he died. He buried in Duluth. And what was grandma's name? No, I can't remember. Anyway,
What was
she married about just 3 different times.
Freddie? Do you know
I think her name was Myrtle.
Myrtle?
Is her name Myrtle?
Yeah.
Maybe,
Your mom's
maybe
mom?
it was. Maybe it was. Yeah, I think it was.
I'm leaving now, so your source of information
Okay.
is going.
Yeah,
Where are you going?
So
Myrtle Gould. And
Print some pictures.
they had 2 children. My father, or my grandfather, and my uncle Harold, and my mother. 2 kids only.
so your uncle Harold and your mom were the only 2 kids in that marriage.
Yeah, both of them are more like their father.
Okay.
See,
Grandpa Gould.
What?
There were 3 and 1 died. Before your mother was born, 1 died.
Oh, the 3 in her family? Oh, that's
Why do
pretty
you
sad.
know? Remember
I'm
this,
talking
but
about
it doesn't.
her children. Never mind, I'm going.
Anyway, my father would never let us kids ever disagree with my mother. And she never raised her voice. She would just suggest things. And that's what we were supposed to do. And my dad protected her all our lives. I remember that. But he'd give us hell. Like sometimes he'd give me hell, and then he'd turn around and give me a big hug.
So now, your mom and your dad obviously met up north in Minnesota. So they're both from
They're in
Minnesota.
Crosby, because I was born in Crosby. 25.
Yeah, but so it's northern Minnesota, right? Crosby.
Well, it's yeah.
That's the Iron
Iron
Range,
Range.
right?
No, they met in Duluth. At that
So
time.
your mom and your dad met in Duluth.
Yeah, because see, there's a lot of history that's very vague, but I know of it a little bit. Before bad time, before 1929, my grandfather and grandmother had a farm in St. Louis Bay.
Right.
They had a farm in St. Louis Bay, and when you're coming down Thompson Hill, over in Duluth, you see all this archipelago of other islands and so forth.
Yeah, yeah.
They got to their farm and on and off by boat.
Really?
Yes. And so they had that for
So-
a while. Then
So this was who was this that had the farm in the island?
my grandfather and my grandmother on
Yeah.
my mother's side.
So those are your mom's parents.
Yeah,
Your mom's parents had a farm in one of those islands in Duluth Bay.
that's right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
So they had to go there by boat?
that's right. Going on and off, they went by boat.
That's interesting.
But from there, then Morgan Park is almost the westernmost city in Duluth, or township in Duluth, Morgan Park. And way out west, during the Depression then, my grandfather and my grandmother ran a boarding house for railroaders and steel workers and whatnot. And that's where my mother and father met.
Okay.
That Emily, she was, well, I'm so sorry that these kids never got to know her. She was really quite a lady.
So Emily was
That would be my father's wife,
That's his mom.
your mom.
my mom. Yeah. And so that's where they met.
Who we
and
always know
courted
as
and
Grandma.
they got married in Duluth. And ever after that,
So tell me about your siblings. Who was the oldest?
Leona.
So Leona was the oldest.
Then came Dorothy.
Dorothy.
Then came Lois.
Okay. Lois.
No, Buddy came. I had a brother that died when he was about 2 of
Buddy.
polio. Then it was Lois, June, and me. June and I are 2 years apart.
5 of you.
And
So are you closest to June because you guys were
Oh
about the same
yeah,
age?
our lives were entirely different. The older sisters were all in California in the 30s. Lois went out there when she was 13 years old and lived with Grandma. And this is hard times now, you understand. And Dorothy went out, and believe it or not, she was a little older. She went to California and ended up working as a maid for Clark Gable.
Oh, the actor.
Yeah. And Leona and I were the only two who stayed back in Minnesota. Leona, of course, got married to Herman.
Is that why she stayed back? Because she's already married?
Well, I don't know why, but I think so, because by that time things were beginning to pick up again, and Herman worked for the railroad in 2 harbors.
Okay.
And
Now-
that's where they lived. That's where Tim was born, or not Tim, but the oldest, Dick, was born in Isle. that's where Herman worked for his Laurie Simmons, who was his what was the resident? His sister, Herman's sister, was the same age as my mother, or his oldest sister.
Really?
Yeah, and she was married to Laurie Simmons, and they had grocery stores in Isle and in where you picked me up yesterday, Forest Lake. Yeah, that was just a little town then. And Herman worked for him because he was no work, and so that's how they Herman and Ally got married. And we ended up in northern Minnesota, and my older sisters in the 30s had already gone to California.
So
Grandma had gone to California.
did Grandma go to California after Grandpa passed away, or
No,
did they
I'm talking about
both?
my grandma now. My grandma.
your grandma.
My mother's mother
Uh-huh.
went to California in the 30s with her son,
With her son.
and that was our grandma's brother, Harold Gould.
So that was what took the rest of the family to
That's
California.
the first bit of the family going to California.
Okay.
And they all,
And why did your grandma go to California?
because her son was going, and there was nothing around Duluth anymore for her.
And
So
she
they're-
was already a widow by
They're
then?
all going down west.
Was she
yeah.
widowed by then?
Huh?
Was she widowed by then?
Yeah.
Your grandma?
She was very old, yeah. She was,
Your grandpa had passed away,
oh yeah.
so she went with
Grandpa
your.
Gould is buried up in Woodland at the Calvary Burial Cemetery in Duluth.
Okay.
And he was a carpenter and so forth. He was a skilled man, but nonetheless, mother's mother, my grandmother, went with her son
Two.
and his wife to California seeking their fortune.
So what was your uncle's name?
My grandpa,
Your uncle's name that she went out with.
Harold Gould.
So your grandma went out with Harold Gould
That was her son.
to California.
Yeah,
That was your
You just
uncle.
told me to see
That's
this
my
video.
uncle.
Your son.
and he had been working previously with Minnesota Power and Light. He was a very talented guy. He got out to California and he landed good jobs right away. But during that time, Michael, there was a caravan of people going to California
Mhm.
from everywhere. Grapes of Wrath is an example of that.
Yeah.
Right. And
The Steinbeck book.
that's right. And so, go west, young man. And it used to be a slogan that said, see the USA in a Chevrolet.
Why are we being so sensitive today? You guys woke me up.
See the USA in a Chevrolet. That was an ad in Route 66. You maybe don't, you never hear about that now, but that's how people went. They took everything they owned and went to California. And that was part of my family did that too.
So there were 5 kids in your family then, and it sounds like you were closest to your mom's side of the family, right? What about
Imagine
your
you've done that to
dad's
me
parents?
They're dead long. My dad's parents, well, my grandmother, his mother, died in childbirth. That was the last child they had. And my grandpa was a Scot. He was a Scot. He was a carpenter.
So he was a Cameron.
Yep. And he built, there are all kinds of Camerons up in Canada that I'm related to.
Mhm.
That I don't even know.
You've been up there.
Oh, yeah.
What's the name of the town you went to? Ford
Thunder Bay.
So Thunder Bay.
Thunder Bay.
And in fact, my family, the Camerons, were active in the fur trade. And the Cameron names all over up there. And so anyway, one branch of them would be my father's father. And my dad was, he was around 13 or 14 when they came, he was born in Canada. And they came down into Minnesota to build the Iron Range. The Iron Range was just getting going at that time.
Okay.
And so my grandfather built a lot. Well, the town of Tower, he claims to have built himself.
So he was a construction
He
carpenter.
was he was a carpenter.
He could pound the
But he
nails.
was
with
also an
a-
alcoholic. And so he died at a very young age.
Okay.
Okay, that left the family in my father's hands. And my father took care of his siblings until the state came along and took them all away from him.
Now, your father's first name was
William John.
William.
John. We had 3 names. I can't remember them. We named our Bill after him. Anyhow, he became the father of the family, and there were 4 or 5 kids that he was taking care of. And he was about 14, 15 years old then. And so the state came along, took the kids away from him, and so he had a brother that ended up in New York, and he had a sister that ended up in Canada, and he never got to see them until years and years and years and years later. And I remember when they had a family reunion, around the time we used to live in Aiken, around that area too, on my great uncle Alex's farm during the Depression.
Yeah.
And so we all fed well, and I had my 2 years or more experience on a farm. I really enjoyed that. For June tried to hang me.
What? June tried to hang you?
Yeah, June and I were playing in the barn, and I was the villain. And she had a rope over a lanyard over wrapped her there.
Oh, goodness.
She was all set to hang me when my dad walked in and stopped it. So
you survived.
I can't know about that yet. Yeah. We were good friends. We went to a country school there in Aiken, or out in the country rather, and that was a great experience. But I forget where I was now, but I try to get this thing with a little continuity to it. It's hard to do.
Well,
Our life was quite scattered at that time.
so your dad William married your mom, whose name was
Emily.
Emily Gould.
Yeah.
And when William passed away in 1961,
Yeah.
and you were going to tell me how he passed away, and then we digress.
Oh, okay. Lois called me one time.
They were in California already.
Well, Lois is in California now. All my sisters except for Elma. And at that time, I was taking care of Bonnie and Linda and Michael. I was the father and the mother at the same time for a number of years. My parents came back once or twice when they were still in good health and spent a whole summer taking care of my kids because their mother was gone, disappeared. And so when they had to go back to California, then I was busy. I had the gas station then, and I was making bread, and I was trying to give them the kind of childhood I had.
A home.
A home, yeah, 'cause homemade bread and all that stuff. So anyway, running the gas station and raising 3 girls for a while was quite a chore, but nonetheless, Michael was the oldest, and she turned out to be sort of the mother of the 2 younger ones.
Surrogate mother.
Yeah.
So what happened to Kathleen, your first wife?
She finally came back. She was out east, and she came back, and we got divorced, and she married a military man in Duluth.
So
And that was her last marriage, and then she died here quite a few years ago now.
why did she have problems? What happened?
Alcoholic.
So she was
Yeah,
alcoholic.
I used to come home and dump whiskey bottles in the sink because the women in that neighborhood would get together in our house often because there were no better place. Across the street was another alcoholic, and several of them, they'd be drinking booze and playing cards and stuff like that. And I'd come home and take the bottles and dump them, everything in the sink. There was beer cans and whiskey bottles hidden behind drapes. There's to clean those out. I mean,
So it sounds like a pretty bad thing.
that was just the homework.
So was Kathleen a girlfriend from high school?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And she came from a bad family too, so it's kind of hard to blame her because
Well, we're not here to pass judgment, are we?
no. Well, her father was a mean son of a bitch. He put strike that, and he took her one. If she sold someone else's a penny or something, he put her hands in boiling water.
Oh goodness.
So that's the kind of upbringing she had.
So
So.
she was abused as a girl.
So, actually, the reason we went together is I was trying to save her.
So
I was trying to be a hero.
so you ended up having 3 daughters.
Four.
Well,
Oh,
Three with
three, yeah.
Kathleen.
All right, 3.
And then she left, went to the East Coast. She just left.
She was gone for months.
Okay.
She went with the, I forget what it was now, the Women's Auxiliary. The Moose Club. Women's Auxiliary was having a big convention out there. And she went out there with them and she stayed. She's gone a long time.
So your mom and dad came to help you with the girls,
Yeah.
and they were here for a while.
Oh, yeah.
But your dad died in California,
Yes.
so he was there helping you.
But then they couldn't come back anymore. He wasn't well enough to. And that was an interesting period.
So that's about the time that you must have met Purdy.
In '60, yeah.
You met Purdy in 1960.
Yeah.
How did you?
I had this station, and
So that's
she
grandma to the
was
boys.
she was teaching school in Hermantown, and the 2 people that were her friends also were teaching school in Hermantown. And every Friday night and Saturday night, they came in my station and got gas because he played in the band with Uncle Harry Nowitzki.
Uh-huh.
And so that's how we got acquainted. Yeah.
So you met Purdy at your gas station.
Well, and actually, she came with them. And then Friday and Saturday nights, when I got all dolled up, I went down to the Legion and danced and had a good time. So,
With Purdy.
yeah. Well, and that's how I met her then. See?
So you met Purdy at the gas station
Well,
and at the
that's-
American Legion dances.
At the gas station is where I first saw her. She was with,
Those friends.
yeah,
So she was a teacher in Hermantown. Where's Hermantown?
Hermantown's in Duluth. And Hermantown is a suburb of Duluth. It is now a little town of itself. It's got around 10,000 people in it now.
Okay.
But that's up way at the Miller Trunk and when you go over the Miller Trunk, the dividing line, you'll see the theater. They used to be way up there. That's in Hermantown. A
Okay.
lumber yard's in Hermantown,
Got it.
and so forth.
Up on the hill.
Yeah.
Way up on the hill.
way up past the mall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you and Purdy met in 1960, and you got married when?
See, well, it was probably '59 we met, and she was teaching school at, I think 1961.
No, I got married in 60. My mom was born in 61.
Okay. Pause it,
Oh.
David.
Okay, it was 1960? Yeah.
Fine, Grandpa.
Oh, they lived in California now, you know.
So
My grandma there was dead, and they inherited her home and whatnot.
this is in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Old town San Diego. And Lois built the house. She and her husband built the house on the same property.
What was Lois's husband's name?
Uh,
Who did she marry?
Well, he was the father of her 2 children. And I don't know when she was married, but you saw her daughter here at the family reunion.
Yes.
Remember that?
Okay. Sure.
Carol.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's Steve as the son. And somehow they don't get along very well, so they never are together anywhere. She would be, she'd be pretty old now. She'd be in her 50s, I think, or more.
So,
But my dad, Lois is the one that called me in Two Harbors.
uh-huh,
He said, you better come out and see your father,
because,
because he's not too well and he's not coming back anymore to see us. So Linda, little Linda from Alaska, and my sister Liana, and Prudy and I had a pretty fancy car at that time, and we drove all the way out to California to visit my father. And my first experience was we came across Arizona into California, and here was a 4-lane highway. And I was not at all familiar with freeways. I turned onto going the wrong direction.
oh my goodness.
I had cars blowing horns at me all over the place. Anyway, I got turned around, finally got squared away, and my father, knowing we were coming, he would out. Kind of hard to tell you.
It's okay. Take your time.
He'd sit in the highway, looking for Minnesota cars.
Your dad was waiting for you?
Finally, he gave up and drove up the hill to the house. And I remembered that where the house was because I had been there as a kid, so I drove up in the yard, right behind him. And he got out of his car and he said, "Where the hell have you been?" That was our greeting. And then he took Prudy and me for the next day or two. He wanted to show us San Diego. And he drove us all around. And next day he had an appointment in the hospital. And he insisted on driving there too. So
Keep
we
talking.
drove. I'm remembering a lot of things, aren't I? It's a good thing he's asking questions, because I guess I wouldn't remember half of this stuff.
Just stop for 2 seconds.
We have.
and they'll stop.
So he said, where the hell have you been?
Yeah.
And then,
The next day, he took us all over town. He wanted to show us San Diego. And he had a 1949 Chrysler.
uh-huh,
And anyway, the next day, he was scheduled to go to the hospital.
why was he going to the hospital?
Have an examination. He had lung problems and a heart problem and whatnot. That's,
Do you know what it was?
well, he was in the hospital first in Minneapolis for that very first same thing. And so we had to go to the hospital. So my father wore a baseball cap, and he had his case of toiletries in a little bundle there. And he and mother were standing on the elevator, they're ready to go up to the doctor's. And Liana and Linda and Prudy and I were there with him. And I had a strange feeling about that, because I could see in his eyes that he was saying goodbye. He knew he wouldn't come back. He knew that. Well, lo and behold, in a little while, they came down and told us that he had died on the recovery table. He had had some lung examinations and whatnot, and he died on the recovery table.
So he'd had a surgery for something.
It was an examination, really. It wasn't surgery yet. The tubes or whatever that they used, I'm not sure.
I wonder.
Anyway, mother, in a very quiet way, she'd sit and she'd cry. No fanfare, just tears. And we buried him out there, and my dad was like me, he was an atheist, and they didn't know what to say about him. We went to the funeral once, and the funeral was in a little Spanish chapel. And of course, wherever we moved, the mother always found a church to go to. And it didn't matter where it was. It didn't matter whether it was Catholic or Presbyterian or whatever it was. It didn't matter. It was a church. Mom went to church. And Dad would drive her and go pick her up again. Well, here was a little Spanish church. And it had a Jesus Christ standing as you came in, and when you walked, the eyes followed you all the way down to wherever you're going. Mm-hmm. That was quite a phenomenon for me to see that. But anyway, they had a hard time putting together what to say about him because nobody had any records on him. Mm-hmm. And so it was just a very plain service. And so he's buried somewhere in California, so his mother.
Do you know, he's buried in San Diego?
Yeah, my father and mother.
Both your parents?
Yeah.
Do you know what cemetery it is?
No, I don't.
Okay.
June must know. But anyway, that was how he died, and took me 2 years to get over that.
That must have been really hard for you.
It was very hard, because oftentimes fathers and sons have a lot of unfinished business. And he would write to me on a postcard, and it would simply say, "What the hell did you do? Break your leg or break your arm?" Because I didn't write letters to them enough. See, I didn't communicate enough with them. Uh-huh. And I felt so bad about that.
Well, you get busy with life and all, don't you?
I was busy, very busy, and very selfish, I guess. He'd write. He was the one that communicated. My father was a very compassionate man.
Of course, he was retired by then, right? So he had a little time to write.
Yeah, but he was a compassionate man. He was sentimental, he was compassionate. And my mother was stoic, very, very reserved. And she's the one that held that whole family together during the Depression years. My father almost committed suicide one time. Mm. Rose caught him in the bed. He had a gun. He was all ready to kill himself because it was so hard to find work. It was so hard to, it was tragic times.
It was very tragic times.
We before the crash in 1929, my parents were what you might call upper middle class. He was on the school board, mother's in the Masons. They were upper style of living. They had maids and everything else. And after the crash, nothing. We drove away from that town and never went back, and so life was full of travail, and yet.
So you lost a job.
I never felt abused at all because I never missed a meal. During the Depression years, I had a hell of a good time as a kid. And my parents suffered through that without letting me know about it. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it was hard on my dad because he's quite proud. And mother's the one that kept us all together. More than once we had Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas dinner on a trunk about the size of this table. Because we had just moved into a new house and a new place, so I had the privilege of going to 12 different schools before I was in the 6th grade. And
you had an eclectic growing up.
Yeah, and that's always been, I thought, a terrific advantage because
it broadened your horizon.
I was introduced to many different cultures and how people lived in different villages and whatnot. I was always the new kid on the block. Damn good thing I was big, because the bullies never bothered me too much. So my final years were, as a growing teenager, were in Two Harbors, which I hold those memories very dear, in spite of all the things. In high school, I had a lot of good friends.
So, Don, you married Prudy in 1960.
No, 1940. Oh, you know, 1960.
Prudy.
Did you say?
So, did you have your house on Stony Point Drive then, or did you buy it later?
No, Prudy and I about that.
So you bought that home together.
Yep.
That must have been no more than a hunting cabin up there.
Well, it was actually, it had been down on the waterfront, and that was against the law, so they had to move it up. People from Minneapolis owned it.
Oh.
And what we did before we got married was we would take, each of us would take a certain amount of money out of our checking accounts and put it into a savings account, so we had something to pay for a house, see?
Uh-huh.
And it happened that I had a very good friend who was a real estate agent. She was a little squat gal named Bess Lee. She was a male. She lived with a very nice person, but Bess was all man, and she I took care of her car for her, and she drove a Packard, and she could damn near see over the, she was so small she could just see over that thing. She creeped, when you're going down towards Knife River,
Yeah.
on the curve there going onto the tracks,
Yeah.
there used to be a great big billboard, big sign there.
Oh.
Bess creamed that thing more than once. Anyway, it was because of Bess that we got financing
Uh-huh.
to buy that house.
Got
And she was a good friend of mine as well as an agent. And she'd always bring her Packard in for me to work on. So that's how we got that house. But then we paid for it in 4 years, $10,000, because we had a little saved up to start with. We made these payments, and then Prudy's grandmother died, grandfather or something like that, and she inherited enough money to
Just pay for it.
pay it all. That's how come. Excuse me. And we never knew, we never knew what we really had bought.
So,
That didn't wake us up until about 50 years later.
so that's how long you've been there. You've been there
46 years.
46, 47 years.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that was. So that's our estate right now. That's the thing.
it is.
Yeah.
So,
So,
do you remember meeting Prudy's parents?
oh yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, I used to drive with. Once we met, I'd take about one day a week, and I'd drive to St. Paul, and she and I would go out on a date. See, and that's how I met her parents, her mother and her father. And her mother was strangely, that was a lot like my mother. She was a pretty quiet person. She was very. It was her father that was the outspoken one in that family. That's where Prudy gets that from.
Kind of the opposite of our family, because I'm the soft spoken.
Yeah, but anyway, but Prudy's mother she was a real dear, and I liked her a lot. So that's how I met them. And then on December 27th, we got married in Iowa.
Iowa.
Well,
Why Iowa?
well.
That's a little ways from
But there
home.
were certain laws. I can't remember what they were now. We had to have blood tests, and my best pal Al Augustino, who you've never met, and Prudy's mother stood up for us, and we got married in the first city across the border. What is it?
I don't know.
Mason City?
Mason City, Iowa. Yeah. That was around Christmas time. the 27th of December, or after Christmas, as I remember.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's very convoluted. It's a very complicated life.
So, when you got married to Prudy, you already had 3 daughters that you had with Kathleen, and Kathleen and you had already been divorced, and then Becky came along.
Well, first of all, you're ahead of it a little. Michael stayed with her mother.
Okay.
Because Michael wanted to graduate from school in Two Harbors. He had a lot of good friends there. And thank the Lord that Michael had good friends and mothers of friends who really looked after her, knowing her situation. So she had friends that she wanted to finish school with. Bonnie and Linda came with me. And when I was getting the divorce, I told him, we had the same lawyer, and I said, no matter what judgments you make on this, these kids will be coming with me. And he thought that pretty arrogant of me to say that. But he didn't understand the whole situation. Sure enough, the kids came with me. So Prudy became a stepmother right off the bat.
Yeah.
And she did a good job of that. And, that as you can see, the whole, today, all the girls are fond of her. And that it wasn't easy for her, you know. She was much older than Michael.
Yeah.
And Mike finally came. It was hardest for Mike to adjust, Prudy and Mike to adjust, because Michael was just a little bit younger than she was, and senior in high school, and had sort of lived her life according to her style for a while. But they finally ironed it out. And all 3 of those girls are pretty close to the whole family here.
Yeah.
And they're all good kids, and I don't know how they did it. Yeah.
So,
It's just,
tell me about the first home that you remember living in. Your first house. That was in Crosby.
Crosby, 1929, 1924.
Do you remember that house?
Yeah. It was a big, lavish house. It was rented. Very few people owned homes.
So how many bedrooms?
Oh God, I can't remember all that. I can't remember the details, except that I remember I had a dog, Laddie. She was an English Water Spaniel, and I had a baby buggy that I used to push all over. I'd get out in the street, and that dog would come out there and put her nose against my rear end and put me back up on the sidewalk. So mother never worried about where I was.
Small town.
That dog was wherever I was, babysitting. And we had a dog, Prudy and I had a dog that babysat Bill, our adoptee. And I bought a street tricycle for Bill, and he always wanted to go down the hill to that road. And Pooba wouldn't let him. Every time he started down there, she'd knock the tricycle over.
So let's talk about Bill a little bit. You know, Becky was born in 1961,
Yeah.
and then you made a decision to adopt a baby with Prudy.
We adopted Bill, I think it was 1966.
So tell me about that. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, because she couldn't get pregnant, and she had one miscarriage in there, and that broke her heart, and then she couldn't get pregnant, and we tried and tried. But it didn't work out, so we decided, okay, we'll adopt somebody. And we knew about, we had friends who knew about Bill, and he was just a few months old when we got him.
So Bill is a Native American kid,
Yeah.
and he was born in what reservation?
He was born in Detroit Lakes. Now, I don't know that it was a reservation that they were on. But anyway, Detroit Lakes was where he was born. We went to see him, and he's a roly-poly kid. He was the happiest little kid you ever saw. We visited with him for a whole day, and he really sucked us in. So we took Bill home, and until he was 13 years old, he was a real prize. He was a bright kid, too. He had a high IQ, but he had no drive.
So what happened at age 13?
He found out he was Indian, and he rebelled against that. And part of the problem is we knew nothing about Native Americans. I didn't learn about them until I went back to college, and I took courses on that, but by that time it was too late. So we made a lot of mistakes, but so did the school. When he was going to school, he was branded an Indian right away. See?
So that was two harbors?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I don't know, he got to displaying the bad side of himself, to get in trouble, get noticed, or whatever. And life's changed. It's very sad. He was a great athlete, but he wouldn't join any team. He could throw a baseball so hard it'd knock you over. And he used to fish down in the lake with a can. Mm-hmm. And he'd lay on the rocks there, and then minnows and stuff like that go by, he'd scoop them up. See? And he used to go out, and we had a garden. Now, you know, the old highway is 1,600 feet from where our house is. And we had a path from there. We had a garden out here by the highway. And it tilled and tilled and tilled, and worked on. And the deer and the bear and the rabbits always got the produce, so we quit. But nonetheless, Bill used to go out there when he was a little kid. And he'd camp for 2 or 3 days. Out there on the property.
In the garden?
Yeah.
Camp?
Yeah, camp.
So did you help him pitch a tent or something? Or?
No, he didn't even have a tent. He'd go out there and he'd have blankets and whatnot. I don't know how he managed it, but he had an innate knowledge of existing. No, and I sure didn't teach him. When I would take him for walks as a little kid, he'd see things that I never knew were there. He'd turn rocks over, and he's exploring all over. He was definitely
in touch with nature.
He was in touch with nature. I guess that was inherent. He just automatically knew these things. He could survive. And when he got into trouble as a teenager, he spent some time in a camp for teenagers up on the Iron Range. I used to go up and visit with him up there, and he was the leader of the gang. And all the kids that was in camp there were ruffians, and that they all followed Bill. And one of the things they had to do was go out in the woods for 3 days and survive with nothing more than a knife and some good clothes. So he did that like a snap. And,
he knew where to find food and all that stuff.
He really knew. He knew all about that stuff.
So
ever being taught.
So Bill, your son, left home when he was what, 15 or 16? Just started having.
I think he was a little older than that. Yeah, I think he had. I don't ever remember him graduating from school, but it was close to that when he took off. And he'd always call and come back because he needed help with something. He had some old junker car that he wanted me to work on, fix for him, or stuff like that. He'd get in jail in Wisconsin, and we'd go bail him out.
Was that because of drinking?
Yeah, he lived with a woman, and he was also a wife beater. So, I mean, it just his whole cosmic view of life changed.
Yeah. That's too bad. He was a good kid when I knew him, Don.
Yeah, he was.
Ooh, Matt Hannon.
Don,
We used to have a station wagon. In fact, I gave it to Bonnie and Gary when they got married, so they drove it up to California.
now, the house that you have in Stony Point was not like that when you first moved in there.
No,
You've added to it.
we've added to it, yes.
So, I mean, when you first bought the house, it had the front two rooms, the dining room and the little.
The front room was actually a porch. The first thing I did was change that into a room.
The dining room now used to be a porch.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. It had French doors
got
and
it.
whatnot. So you're wondering how we accommodated having those kids live there.
Well, I'm trying to think of the house. The upstairs was there,
But it wasn't far from complete.
so it was like an attic.
But yeah,
So it was really just a small kitchen.
yeah, that's about as big as. Well, we add that on now.
Well, the new kitchen now was an addition.
That's an addition.
So you
And
had
the bedroom,
the room with the fireplace.
yeah, that was there.
You had the room right at the bottom of the stairs. That was there.
Yeah.
The
that
stairs were there.
Was, and then the front porch, which we made into a part of the house.
Right. So that was a tiny little house.
Actually,
It was a
yeah.
cabin, Dad. That's why.
It's tiny now.
It used to be a cabin.
So
It's
what have you added to that house? You added the kitchen.
the kitchen.
So that's
And the
new.
bedroom, the main bedroom,
Okay.
back there.
With a library.
Uh,
And then you
the
added.
bathroom. Yeah, we've changed the bathroom too.
Put your hand down because you're
Oh,
putting your
oh,
hand in front of
sorry.
your face and he's taping it.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Going to the pharmacy.
Okay.
Snacking it.
Don, what's your dog's name?
Huh?
What's your dog's name?
Heidi.
Heidi. Hi, girl. There's a huge Christmas tree up there.
Well, there's a lot of interesting details that I have forgotten. Because it seems to be for almost parallel there for a while. I had a family on my hands, and so did he. And his mother and father were gone. One time, I learned from my mother that if you wanted to get something out of Dad, you never argued with him. Never. You just suggest it. And when it became his idea, you got it. So I watched her operate. And we were sitting at the supper table one time. My dad got up and made a nice breakfast every morning before he went to work. And I shared that with him. But nonetheless, we were sitting at the dinner table one time, and my mother said, "Bill, you'd look awfully nice in a new suit." And that's all she said. It was well over a month he bought a new suit. And I'm a teenager now. And we had a 1936 Chevrolet. And of course, I was always after my dad because I had a date and I had to have a car. And he'd say no. Cost money to run a car. So at that time, I was working for Vern Anderson. I was going to school, and after school, I worked for Vern. And I'd say, okay. Rather than argue with him, I'd pretend it was just a ball of joy because I couldn't get that car. I'd go up to work. I wasn't there an hour when he'd call and he'd say, "Don, when do you want the car?" That was all there was to it. You didn't argue with him. You just let it flash around in his mind a little bit, and he felt bad because he said no, and so that he'd finally change his mind.
Change the subject a little bit here, Don.
Huh?
I'm going to change the subject a little bit here. And we're going to talk about your health a little bit. On the way down from Forest Lake yesterday, you said you had some broken bones in your life.
Yeah, I've had to. I'm surprised he doesn't.
You have not had broken... Yeah, you sprained a wrist.
Broken wrist.
You broke your wrist?
Twice.
Really? I didn't know that.
Did you? Oh.
Connor broke his wrist.
So I
You hurt it a little bit.
broke it.
How did you break your wrist, David?
4th grade in gym like 2 years ago.
So, like grandpa, like grandson, okay. So, you were riding Becky's bike one day.
Oh yeah. Well, I had customers from Duluth, and so when I worked on their cars, and I'd deliver the cars to them, but I'd take Becky's bike and put it in the trunk of the car, and then I'd ride the bike back home. And one time I was riding along the highway from Duluth to home, and I went off the highway, blacktop. And I guess it was probably where I went off. It must have been about 6 inches between that and the ground. And as we used to do, I'd jump the front end of the bike back up onto this pavement, but I didn't make it. And the wheel went sideways. I went down the highway on my shoulder, and then I got up and went into the ditch and went to sleep. I was in shock. And a little while later, there were some people that saw this happen, and they came over, woke me up, and took me in the bike home. I was only a mile from home when it happened. And that's where this clavicle of mine is sticking up in the air.
You have it sticking up in the air?
Yep, right there. You can feel it. You can
Show
see
me.
it. Right there it is.
Show me.
You want to see that?
Yeah, just pull your shirt off a little bit. No, don't take your shirt off, just off on the top there.
I don't hold on. Maybe hold it down.
Yeah, like right there. If you do that,
Yeah.
you got that lump
That
there.
bump, yep.
What about the other side?
The other side's not like that. I can use this, but my arm is not very flexible anymore. I can't lift much this way, for example. And, but they took me home, and when Becky and her mom came home from church, that was on a Sunday, and they had gone to the Unitarian church. When they came home, I was sitting in the yard with my arm in a sling. I'd been down to see Doc Greasy, and Becky cried because her bicycle was all mutilated. Trudy looked at me and she said, "Oh shit, how are we going to dig potatoes?" That's when we still have the garden, see. And the first thought in her mind was, how are we going to dig potatoes now? That was that episode.
Now you also broke a hip at the shop, right? You tripped over
Yeah,
a jack or something?
I broke both hips. I broke one 25, 30 years ago and one year ago. And that's how I met some pretty good friends. Yeah, I tripped over a jack carrying a battery. And I didn't want to break the battery, so I hung on to it and I fell. Tripped, and I didn't feel anything. I tried to get up, and damn if I didn't fall again. I couldn't support myself, so the guys brought me down to Doc, and he called Prudy and told her about it, and then he took me to Duluth, or she came and took me to Duluth, and that's how I met Walt Gower. Walt Gower became my osteoporosis.
You're an orthopedic surgeon.
Arthur, yeah, and today Walt and I are good friends. Yeah, yeah. But before that, let's see. I had a couple of things happen when I was a kid playing football. And oh my God. I remember Mother standing on the sidelines. She and Leona came to every game, home game we had, and watched, you know. And this arm came out, it was knocked out of the socket, so it was laying back up here. And I thought to myself, my first thought was, oh God, Mother's going to come out and be a mother, you know. And but she didn't. She stayed right where she was. I was so proud of her. And the doc, I can't think of the doctor's name at that time, when I was a kid in high school. He came and got me and took me down to the hospital, and a little bit he had that all snapped back into place again. In about 2 weeks I was playing football again. And another time, I told David about this Indians block that this kid did on me, knocked me out. And,
What's an Indian block?
it's a cartwheel.
A cartwheel.
You do a cartwheel and your heels strike your chest. The guy's chest, it just knocks the wind out of you. You're out, just like that. And the guy that did that was in his 20s. He was not even supposed to be playing high school football, but he worked in steel mills and Duluth, and when it came time for football season, he went back to school. So he's a big kid. Anyway, I don't know how long I was out, but as I told David, when I came to, they were carrying him off the field. And the reason was, my guys, after I got knocked out, they quit playing football. They just laid for him. Every play, they didn't care where the ball went. They went after him. And a bunch of guys would lay him, just mangled the hell out of him. And so I took him out of the game. He never played anymore. He never played again. Because it was illegal to begin with. She was way overrated. Anyway, there was lots of, not necessarily broken bones, but oftentimes my stool was red from injuries, internal injuries.
Now you've had more serious stuff on that though. You had a heart attack at one point, right?
Oh, well, that's later, much later.
And did they do bypass surgery for
No,
you?
the first thing they did was put a stent in.
Okay.
Put a stent in, and I think it was almost been 2 or 3 years after that, I did a double bypass. And then I broke my heel one time, and that was the worst of all. I fell out of the ladder.
How'd you do that?
Well, I slipped on the ladder, and my foot got caught in the rungs.
What were you doing up on the ladder though?
I was getting the snow off the roof.
At your house?
Yeah. And Jesus, that hurt. My foot was all crushed, my heel. And the doc came and got me and brought me down to not to Walt Gar this time. It was a different doctor. And it took months for that to heal. I was on crutches there for a long time because of that heel. That takes a while to heal, I'll tell you.
It sounds painful, Don. So, now the latest bit was that after your second hip fracture, you were having a hard time breathing.
Well, that was when we went to, you had diagnosed that, I had pneumonia. When we were in San Diego.
Yeah.
I was tired all the time. Came home trying to keep up with everybody in the luggage, and I just couldn't keep up. And that's when you picked me up, or picked us up at the airport, and
You look pretty peaked.
we went right directly to your clinic. Took X-rays and stuff like that. At that time, it turned out to be pneumonia, but probably, Michael, I might still have it. I don't know. We don't diagnose it that way, but I don't know exactly what pneumonia is, except is it fluid on the lungs or
Yeah, it's an infection in the lungs.
yeah.
Makes it hard for you to breathe and makes you
Yeah.
cough and gives you fever.
I cough a lot, but I feel that the the coughing is always a dry cough, except in the morning.
Now you're seeing a lung specialist now, Don, because
Do what?
you're seeing a lung specialist because they think you have a lump in your chest.
They think I have cancer.
Is that lung cancer?
Yeah. So
So
they're periodically taking X-rays to see if it's growing.
CAT scans?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And your breathing's a little harder now.
Well, I get out of breath and I sit down for a while. I walk quite a bit during the day. But the early time in the morning is the hardest because I talk and spit for 10-15 minutes going down the highway to get cleared out, get everything cleared out. My sinuses drained during the night, which complicates it. So, but once I get cleared out, I'm good for the day, normally. Just a lot of coughing. And
Now, I want to ask you about a couple of other things, Don. You know, one of the things that you haven't been able to do very much of lately is acting. So I think it's great that after having your business for all those years, you went to college after that.
well, a few things happened before that.
But then you started doing some acting. You started impersonating Mark Twain.
But I did that for pretty near 30 years.
Tell me about
All over.
that.
I was in University of Michigan, University of Minnesota, McAllister, up in Canada, Arizona. Yes, I'm very proud of that. That was a pretty successful gesture.
How did you start doing that?
Well, that's something. Dick Kunz, you remember Dick Kunz?
Sure I do.
Okay. We had a party one time, and I did a skit for him on Mark Twain. And then Dick Kunz says, well, I'm having a party for my colleagues. He says, well, you doing it for us? And so I said so. So I did some Twain for them. Well, after that, it became professional because Mike Walke came along and said, well, we're having a Minnesota Medical Association up in Brainerd. Says, I want you to come up and do a trade show up there. There was 500 people there. And I did. And so it became professional after that. It just, I was asked by many places to come and do this show around Duluth and elsewhere. But one very proud part of my life was while I still had the service station in business, the English teachers, a couple of them in Two Harbors, used to ask me to come over to the school and talk to juniors and seniors because they thought it was quite a unique situation as a mechanic that's literate. And I would talk literature to them and a lot of different things. But beyond that, I also taught creative writing for my class. Bill Hamango, for example, who's a neurosurgeon today. Brian Siney, the bright kids of that period attended my class at night in the school. And their English teacher was she was a Phi Ed. She was a physical training teacher. And so these kids got to know more about the English language through me than they did through her. And she objected to that, and so the superintendent had to stop it. But it was quite a few months that I did that. And these kids went on to Duluth. And first examination you take when you enter the rooms is you got to sit down and write a little skit about yourself. And these kids knew how to do it. And
So what's your favorite Mark Twain quote?
my favorite quote? Oh God, this is the end of that. The end of that.
You still have the wig and the mustache though, right?
Oh yeah. I got lots of it in my head. I use a lot of his quotes in my paper too. I produce it. But I think that Mark Twain had wealthy friends, even though he picked on the wealth. And one time he was at some kind of a convention with Mr. Rogers, who was a banker and who had financed Mark Twain many times. And there's a person that knew Mark Twain, and he came along and said, he says, I don't understand. He says, you're with Mr. Rogers. He's a wealthy banker. And, you know, his career is a little bit tainted, isn't it? And Mark turned and said, yes. He said, because his money tain't yours and tain't mine. So that's what I remember often.
Funny.
But he poked fun at human folly. That's why he's still around. Because he made us laugh at the stupid things we do. That was a whole career in itself, wasn't it? That sort of a side. Yeah.
And your more recent career has been at the Pines. Tell me about that.
Oh, well,
What's the Pines done?
the Pines is a condominium rather apartments for the elderly who sell their homes and move into the Pines. They're generally, when they come there, they're very viable, and they have all facilities of living, cooking, and everything within their apartments, pretty good sized apartments. And for 12 years, I was a maintenance man there, and that happened because one time I was doing stories for the News Tribune. And we had a thing called Outlook for the next year. And I must have done 40 stories or more about different people who advertised in that Outlook. Ron Edmonds was one of those. I wrote the stories for his real estate company. And that's how Ron and I got acquainted. And he wanted me to do some writing for him on advertising. And I said to him, Ron, I said, a picture's worth 10,000 words. Instead of writing something, he wanted us to show pictures. And he did. Anyway, Ron and I became friends. And by, he knew I was a mechanic, or had been. And so he started calling me to do some work for him. At first, it was going to be maybe 5-10 hours a week. That's what his wife said. But before very long, it was 8 hours a day or more. And 12 years, I did electrical work and plumbing work and
So
all kinds of different
You've done
things.
all kinds of maintenance for the place.
All kinds of maintenance, yeah.
But you've done more than that.
Well, I've done some shows there. I've done some social work there. He told me that he wanted me to do more social work at one time and less maintenance. And I said, Ron, I do social work every day. You know, these people hugging them and kidding with them and so forth.
I mean, when you went into the apartments to take care of them, you were visiting with them.
Yeah. So that's been a great experience. That's that's one of the highlights of my life is that period of time that I've spent at the Pines. Right now, I'm still there, doing smaller things and doing the newspaper. And there's a very capable guy that's taken my place as a maintenance man.
Do you need to use oxygen now?
Did what?
Do you need to use oxygen now?
Do I need to? That may be, man. I got it with me, and
So
sometimes I sit down and I might use that a little bit.
so is the reason you're doing less is because you're getting more and more winded?
Excuse me. The reason I'm taking more oxygen, you mean?
The reason you're doing less of the work at the Pines is...
Oh, well, no, that isn't the only thing. Yes, that's very big. I can't do anywhere near what I used to do. Yeah, I can't lift much. It's hard to work over my head.
So you're getting weakness? A
Yeah,
little weakness?
yeah. My muscle tone is way down. I got to get it built up some way. So,
Tell me about Doug Greasy.
Doc Greasy? Doc Greasy has been my buddy for 33, 34 years or more. And he came to town in 1972. He came from Iowa. He had a car problem. And my place was the first place he stopped at. And I did some work for him there. And the chemistry was right. I liked him. He liked me. So it wasn't long after that he set up his practice. No, he went into the clinic first with a bunch of doctors. He didn't like that, so eventually he went downtown and had his own private practice. And on Wednesdays for lunch, he'd come up looking for me. We'd want to have lunch together. Then it got so on Saturday mornings, he stopped by and I was down to Oscar's lunch having breakfast already. He'd meet me down there and we started having Saturday morning breakfast. And that's been going on for over 33 years.
You actually have a Saturday morning breakfast club, don't you?
Yeah, we've got some very talented people in that club. Doctors, lawyers, school teachers. We got a cross section that is very impressive. They are good friends, and we discuss absolutely everything.
Tell me about your writing.
Well, I've been doing that since I was in high school. I used to write papers for juniors and seniors and get A's for them. And when I wrote my own paper as a freshman or sophomore, I'd get a C. The teacher was pretty well, she was right, I was a C student, no better. But I wrote papers for upperclassmen. And I've always wanted to write. I wanted to be a journalist. When I went down to the University of Minnesota after graduating, the counselor in there looked over my record and whatnot, and they said to me, "Why?" He says, "You're a mechanic." Well, Uncle Sam agreed with him, so that's as far as that went. I became, but then, I had mechanical training from one or two of the most wonderful people in my life. That's another story. And by the time I was 10 years old and we had settled in two harbors, my dad had a Chrysler that he kept in a garage down the block. And that block was owned by a fellow by the name of Dave Young. And Dave was a master mechanic. And I'm 10 years old and I go in there and I shoveled snow from his driveway, and I cleaned his tools, and I spent a lot of time with Dave. And the outcome of that was that I sat all night long with him sometimes because he was listening to a car, listening to an engine. It was talking to him. And he was trying to figure out what it was. And when he finally figured out what the problem was, he'd go to work on it, and he was just about always right. And I said to Dave was, when I was 10, he was probably 70. I said, Dave, you got to be an expert. And he said, son, there ain't no such thing. It's all hard work. And he told me another thing I'll never forget. He said, what counts is what you learned after you know it all. And I'll tell you, when I came back from the Navy, I thought I knew it all. I was a pretty high-class mechanic. I thought. But I got into more damn trouble than you could imagine. And I went to Dave and Archie Murphy, the old timers around town there, and they'd bail me out. They'd bail me out. They'd show me what to do, what I'd done wrong. And they would make things on the lathe because there were no parts houses. And I'd come down and say, I need this. And Archie Murphy, for example, would look at it a little bit like this, and he'd go over to a barrel of metal that he had, and he'd pull out something, put it in the lathe, and make it for me. And Dave do the same thing. Well, Dave retired when I was back out of the war, and I had my own business. He gave me some of his tools, and we were old friends again. And he bought his last car, and he still tinkered with it himself. And one time he tinkered with it, and it wouldn't run right. And he brought it over to me, and he said, I want you to fix it. And he had a carburetor problem. And I was a carburetor specialist, so it didn't take a few minutes to find out what the problem was. In the course of working on his car, he had dropped a little tiny BB, and he never knew it. So it made all the difference in the way the car ran. And I had a lot of parts, so I just put another one in there and put it together, and everything was fine. And I got tears in my eyes. I started thinking about that, and I tell that story because I'll never, if I lived to be 100, I'd never know what this man knew. He was a master mechanic, way beyond me. And he came as a student to repair his car. I'm very proud. That was one of my very proud times. And I don't tell that to belittle Dave. I got to say that he made me feel pretty good when he did that.
Probably the way he did it.
Well, that could be. Yeah,
You ready for a break?
yeah, anytime.
I'm not.
You're not.
Let's take a break.
And about 15, 20 miles back in the woods was this lake that we lived on. We had a cabin there for the summer. And June and I were always sort of in competition over one thing or another. And I played a ukulele and she played a saxophone. And she broke my ukulele one time, sat on it and purposely broke it. And I took her saxophone and I threw it in the lake. I don't know how that turned out exactly, but the story I wanted to tell you was of a guy by the name of Wesley Morris. He was a primitive guy if you ever saw one. All his life he lived back in the woods there, his family, and they didn't even have windows. They had burlap bags over their windows of their cabin they lived in it. They ate bear meat and deer meat and whatever came along. And Musty was probably 5, 6, 7 years older than me. And we're out fishing one day in the lake. Rice Lake, and Musty decided it was time for me to learn how to swim. So he threw me in the lake. And I didn't know the first thing about swimming, but I did know about dog paddling. I sank right down the bottom of that lake, and it was a nice sandy bottom, and the sun was shining, and I could see all of these tall weeds growing on that grass or out of that sand and getting myself tangled up in them. And I fought like everything to get up where I could get air again, but I learned to swim. I learned to do the dog paddle. I did that all the way to shore. And Wesley was laughing and having a good time watching me learn.
Pretty darn kill you.
And we when I grew up, Wesley and I were good friends, and he turned into the logging business. They used to come at my station and buy gas and whatnot, but we always remember those days. That was quite an experience.
All right, let's do it.
No, Mom, open the oven.
Come on. This is the best part. I've been waiting for this all day.
Even this is why Grey's Anatomy, the first season was only 9 episodes.
They are really hot.
You're being
Is this like a little treasure?
Yes, it is. He's so quick. He must have things all.
See, the thing about it is that he thinks that he has scouted the whole house, and
Where's the clue? Right here?
he snoops.
They're all the same size, David. They look.
We're all at work, and he snoops.
See, I don't get it. That's so not fun.
Anybody want more Danish?
All right, no thanks.
No,